Okay, we're going to take a quick look at some of the more advanced features of ecosystem creation. And one thing I want to say is that you cannot create an ecosystem on an infinite plane. It won't work. We will not be able to handle that many polygons. It still handles more than pretty much any other 3D software program out there, so to pretty much ask it to handle an infinite amount would be just ridiculous. So, in order to compensate for that, we can use a cube. And if we take this cube and we can constrain it on the Z and go ahead and just size it down, you could also go in and do this with a numeric value. If you want to go up here, and we can adjust the Z this way with our little frame slider, and that'll make it even thinner. And then we can also adjust our overall size. It's at 30 right now, which is fine for me, because we don't have anything really else in the scene to compare it to, so this is going to be fine. Go ahead and select this object so we can rotate our camera locked in on it. And I'm going to pull it up just a little bit higher. And now we're going to select this first tab up here and double click on our preview for our material. And this will bring up our material editor, and we're going to check off ecosystem. And we're not going to worry about the underlying material, just because the default color right now is fine, and we're just really looking at the ecosystem values of it. I'm going to select general. And we're going to add an object this time. And you can go ahead and add any of the objects included with Vue. You could also load in some of your own objects and import objects in, and there's just tons of stuff you can do with it. But we're going to use the small house under architecture and click OK. And now it's going to prepare the ecosystem, and we're going to go ahead and populate that right away. If we take a look at what it did, was it created pretty much one small house, two small houses and one big house, and that's pretty much because our plane, or this box right now, is only 30 by 30. It's not very large, so the size of our ecosystem is really big. But we can change that. That's no problem. We'll just go back into our material editor, and we can change the scale. If we bring our scale down to, we'll take a look at 0.1 and click populate. You can see now we have a lot smaller houses. But we can make them even smaller than that if we wanted to. We can go back and 0.01 and populate that. Click OK. And now we have lots and lots of tiny little houses. And we have a total of 148 million polygons on the scene, which is quite a bit. But they're all mostly being displayed as two-dimensional planes. So that's the way it can handle that many polygons in the scene. But if we were to render it, you notice the house is still perfectly intact and looks fine. But having this many houses, it's maybe a little too small. We're going to bring that up to maybe 0.05 and populate that. Now we get them a little bit bigger. And that's a little bit easier to see. But now I want to take a look at sort of the alignment. All of our houses are kind of randomly scattered around. They're not exactly facing the same directions. So if we were creating a city, what you could do is create a bunch of city objects, a bunch of buildings, and load them into an ecosystem. And you can just do hundreds of them if you wanted to, and just have all different types of buildings creating your ecosystem. But you wanted them all to kind of face the same direction and not have them rotated 45 degrees at some, 15 degrees, so they're really off in that direction. And as you can tell, these are all off from each other. So we can change that. We'll just go back to our material editor. We're going to go to density, and first of all, we can check avoid overlapping instances. And if we populate that, it's going to show that our houses are no longer intersecting each other, which is a good thing because we don't want them to intersect each other, because they wouldn't in real life. We'll go back to our material editor, and now we're going to look at our scaling and orientation tab. Now, the reason for our size variation is you can tell we have small houses and we have large houses all over the place. And like I said, they're also rotated in different directions. Now, to take care of our rotation, we're going to change our maximum rotation down to 0% and click populate. And now if you notice, all of our houses are facing the same direction. There is no variation as far as their rotation. But you could also rotate or change the amount of how much rotation you wanted in there. As you can see, we bring it all the way up to 180, which will give us different effects. So we could bring it down to 30 or 15 or even 5 or 1. But we're going to set it to 0 because we want it to all be the same. But we also want to get rid of this size variation because we want these houses to be proportionate to each other. Now, granted, we're only using one house, so we're not exactly going to get a lot of variation as far as the looks. But if we had several different buildings, we wouldn't want there to be a size variation because the windows and the doors wouldn't line up proportionately. So under this maximum size variation, we're going to set that to 0. Click Populate. And now, if we take a look at our scene, we'll notice that all of our houses are the exact same size. And they're all in proportionate to each other. Of course, like I said, it is the same house, so there's really only so much you can do with it by only having one. But this way, we have everything all nice and uniform. You also notice we have some patches in here. Little bits and patches here and there. And that's just because our overall density isn't very high. If I go back into our Density tab in the Material Editor, and we change our density up to 100%, click Populate, we'll take a look that we have even distribution, pretty much, pretty close to even, throughout the entire surface. So this is a good way to make cities. The only problem with this is how are we going to add roads? There's no roads in here. Well, what we can do is use a mapping feature by using procedurals and things like that. You could also go ahead and create your own maps for this. But we're going to go back into our material editor, and under density, we're going to select variable density. There's two different things we can do. We could use procedural, or we could use this graph right here. And there's tons of different presets that we have in here, and any of these will work for this. I'm going to use this band's terrain profile to show you what exactly could happen by using that. And we're going to click Populate. And we're not going to see too much of a change by using those specific patterns. So now I'll show you our procedural. I'm going to just change this back to our default value, which I need to find here. This is close enough. It's not making too much of an influence on the object anyway, so that should be fine. But we'll take a look at our procedurals. Now with our procedurals, the white areas will be the most dense, or have just instances itself, and the black areas will have no instances, and then the gray areas will have a variable amount depending on how much gray there is or how dark the gray is. We're just going to grab these sharp radial stripes, and this will give us a really neat effect. Even though it is a spherically mapped procedural, it'll still give us a neat little effect. So we're going to click Populate and click OK. And now, as you notice, we have these areas that aren't being populated, and that's pretty much our texture. So you can go in and grab any of those procedurals and get a variation of what areas you do not want to be affected by this density. We'll go back into our material editor, and we can grab veins and populate with that. Click OK, and that will give us a little bit of a different effect. As you can see, it's because of our overall density is so high that we're getting just so much in there. It's also the function scale too. If we go ahead and bring this down to 0.5 and populate, we'll see a little bit of a change, but not too much. But if we go back to that sharp radial stripes, you could also use terrain altitudes. If we go ahead and use this one right here and click Populate, click OK, we can see that we're missing little sections in here based on that terrain altitude, because the white, these areas are the white parts and these areas are the black parts. So it's just a lot you can do with it. Some neat different things to vary your density. And what you can also do is vary your size based on the same principle, the same effect. If we go into here, and I'm going to change this variable density and check it off, repopulate, so we're back to this kind of uniform grid here. And go back to scaling and orientation and select variable scaling. We can go and do the same thing with this. And we'll select veins, click OK, and populate. And now OK. And as you can see, it's changed the size of each one of our houses based on that map. We have smaller houses in here, which is our darker areas of that map, and bigger houses here, which are the whiter areas. So that's a really neat thing you can do to just vary it up a bit. Like I said, in case, like with this case, with houses, you don't really want to do that because, like I said, it's not really quite proportionate because it is the same model. But if you're using shapes like trees and things like that, where they can be different sizes and it's not noticeable, that you're using the same tree, then this is a great method for creating certain types of ecosystems. And like I said, you could just create your own, and there's lots of different things you can do with it.